Is here. Some did shut off the.
I see you, Randy.
See Sue
See you,
Harris.
Randy.
Birthday now. Linda? Linda?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi, Sue.
I don't see myself. Do you
I
see
see you.
yourself?
No,
I saw you.
I'm Fern, director. I see you, Sue,
Okay.
but I don't see me, but that's okay.
I don't see you. Who was that? I don't even see who that is.
Me?
Yeah.
I'm Fern, director.
Oh, okay. I'm okay.
But I was there when I got on, but I don't see me, which is
Yeah,
fine with
yeah,
me.
yeah. All I see is up to from your nose up, above your nose.
Really? Oh, you do see that?
Yeah.
And you know what? I lifted it. Maybe I have to lift it more.
You have to lift the screen.
Take it down.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
I don't know if this is better or worse, whatever.
I don't. Oh, now I see you. Hello.
Okay.
I don't think that was me.
That I see you. It's you, whoever you are.
And I see you, but I don't know who
I don't see me. I don't see me at all.
No, I'm okay with not seeing me. It's all right with me.
No, you're pretty.
I don't have it.
You're nice. That's very sweet. Thank you, Sue. Are we the only ones on here? Where is
I
everybody?
don't know who's on. I can't see anybody. Oh, now I see myself there. I see someone's top of their head.
All right, hello everyone.
Hi,
Who's that?
Rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi.
How
How
are
are
you
you?
doing? How's everyone doing? Hi, Susan.
Oh, hi, Rabbi.
Hello.
Okay.
I saw that you were on before. I don't know.
Who?
I think I saw your name. Yeah, Shirley.
Yeah, I'm
Belford.
on. Oh, no. Whoa, Shirley's on? I don't see her.
So make sure that the speakers are coming through in the right place. Look in the bottom left. It says stop video and mute. If you press the up, it will tell you how to get the speakers through.
I think
Okay.
we're on, right? Do you hear me, Rabbi Heck? It's Fern, director.
Okay. Yes. So we're going to mute everyone now.
Is this very long?
Okay, good.
Okay. So
Is
I
it
want to
very
just say hi to everyone. Welcome. Let's see who's here. Davida, Susan, Zoe, Sherry, Ken, Stan, Linda, Don, Alan, Shirley, Pete. We have a bunch of people on, a lot of people still coming on. We're going to mute everyone.
Okay.
So that we can get started. Let's see.
I'm not muted.
I will be muting you, don't worry.
Okay. Okay.
Better mute her.
Okay. All right, so now everybody's muted. If you want to ask any questions, if you want to ask any questions, you can do that by typing it in the chat box. I'll type the first thing in the chat box, and that is ourchabad.org/Passover 2021. And that is a link for all your Passover needs. Oh, maybe I didn't put that in white. Hold on, let me try this better. Good link. I don't know why. Is it not working? Okay.
Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Hi, Janice.
How is your family?
Good. Everybody's good. Thank God. Thanks for asking.
Welcome, of course.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Can you see me?
Oh, hi, Elaine.
Yeah, I'm going to be muting everyone, okay? So that we can get started. We only have 3 minutes left. So I want everyone to get on. Everyone figure it out. If you have any questions, if you're not sure how to get on, you could message me privately. Okay. 2 more minutes. We're just letting everyone still get on, and then we will begin.
You'll see right there. There's us, me, and you. I don't know anybody else.
Hey, Ron, welcome.
Thank you. Shalom, Yossi.
Okay. So it is 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started now. So I want to welcome everyone. Those of you who are here, it's very good to see you here. This is very exciting. We have a wonderful presentation ahead of us, but I want to just give a little bit of my own introduction. You know, we're learning now in the Torah, this week's Torah portion, we're learning a double portion called Vayakel and Pikude. And it's the whole story of the building of the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle that the Jewish people carried with them through the desert. And you ask, why is it that God wanted that they had a house of worship that was essentially a portable house of worship? It was the first, if you will, RV. It was the first synagogue RV that was used to travel, you know, all over the world. All throughout the desert, right? Marsha, are you able to hear me good? Everyone can hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So one of the explanations given is that as God said in the beginning when he told us to make the temple, to build the Mishkan, it says, "Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham." You shall build for me a mikdash, shall build for me a home, a synagogue, a house of prayer, and I will dwell within them. And the question is, if there is only one temple, so why did God say dwell within them? And the reason is because although there's one temple, but there's each of us have within us our own little temple. Each of us have within us our own little house for God, so to speak, where we represent. And then every community as well has their own little synagogue, their own house of God, and their own little community. And wherever there's a Jewish community, God goes and dwells with them. And that's why the Mishkan was first made portable, to show that God could be anywhere, that God could be taken, and his
Lost the sound, right?
Jewish home could be in any place. His Jewish home could be found anywhere in the world. And so this is one of the things that we started, a series on Jewish communities throughout the world. We already explored the Jewish community in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and the country of Mexico. A few weeks ago, we explored the Jewish community in Portugal. And then we said, hey, maybe we should explore our own history right here back home in Florida. And I want to thank Don and Randy Nerman for sponsoring this event. Thank you so much. Making this possible, and for also introducing us to Marsha. This is something that actually I'm very excited about, because I know that there's a lot about this in Ocala itself. I've seen, as Marsha will talk about, the oldest standing synagogue, which is in Ocala. There's a very old Jewish cemetery in Ocala, and so there's so much Jewish history here. Although I didn't notice when I was in Ocala a couple days ago, I noticed that they took down the famous building in the center of town that said Goldman on it, on the top. So that was a little disappointing. There was a famous, the famous Goldman building in the center of town. Looks like they took it down and they're going to build something else there. But before I give over the reins, I just want to remind everyone that it's just 2 weeks to Pesach, just barely 2 weeks to Pesach. And it's time to make your plans for Pesach now. We have things that we have everything that you need for Pesach. I have here shmura matzah available. This is a 1 pound box of shmura matzah you can purchase. I have behind me, these are cases of shmura matzah boxes, or you can buy a smaller one that has only 3 within it. It's very important to have shmura matzah on Passover. Matzah is called the bread of faith, and it's also called the bread of healing. And when you eat it on the night of Passover, we get both of these. It brings healing, physical healing, spiritual healing. And so it's very important to eat matzah on the night of Seder, especially shmura matzah. As well, we have Seders to go. For those of you who want to do your Seder at home, we have Seders to go. And we're also going to be hosting a public Seder on Sunday night, the second night of Passover on the 28th. In addition, if you need other Passover needs, if you want to buy kosher wine, we have a variety of different beautiful, good kosher wines. Some that come from Israel, some American wines, but all different kinds of good wines, some Cabernets and some white wines and some Merlots and different options that you could choose from, a good kosher wine. And also some kosher meat or other things that you may need for Passover. So again, sign on to archabad.org/Passover 2021. And I put the link in the chat box. I'll put it again later, archabad.org/Passover 2021. You could find everything that you need for Passover. And now,
She said something.
and now I am just going to give a little introduction to our guest speaker today, Marcia Jo Zarevitz. She is the founding executive director of the Jewish Museum of the Florida FIU on Miami Beach. She is a native West Virginian who has lived in Florida for more than half a century. She has been a trailblazer in the American and Floridian Jewish communities, serving national, state, and local organizations, and has broken the glass ceiling as the first woman in many positions. Observing that Jewish continuity was a challenge in Florida because of the lack of generational depth, her focus for the past 40 years has been organizing Florida Jewish communities to research, collect, and document their history, then collating and preserving this hidden 250 plus years of Florida Jewish history. In 1995, she created a statewide Jewish history museum with collections, archive, exhibits, publications, and educational programs. Marcia Jo initiated the legislation for both Florida Jewish History Month each January and Jewish American Heritage Month each May to increase awareness of the contributions of Jews to the quality of life for all. She's written books for both national and international publication, and her scholarship has been used in exhibitions, films, TV documentaries, historical journals, and books. Since her 2011 retirement from the Jewish Museum of Florida, she lives in St. Pete Beach and continues to curate exhibits, lecture, research, and write on Florida Jewish history and anti-Semitism. Her seminal book, Jews of Florida, Centuries of Stories, was released last year, and that is the subject of today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Marcia Zarevitz, and you have the floor, Marcia. Thank you so
Hello
much for
to our
joining.
Zoom audience. Thank you, Rabbi. I also want to thank, as you did, my longtime West Virginia family friend, Don Neerman, and his wife, Randy, for introducing me to you, Rabbi Heck, who invited me tonight. To celebrate 25 years since the opening of the Jewish Museum of Florida on Miami Beach, and 35 years of my collecting and interpreting the material evidence of the Jewish experience in Florida, we're going to spend the next 60 minutes sharing compelling stories about Jews in Florida. I wrote a book, as the rabbi said, on what was once a hidden history. Why did I write this book? First, even though Florida is the nation's third largest Jewish community and probably the first place where Jews arrived in what became the United States, no one else had done this research. Second, to debunk myths, like the notion that the history started on Miami Beach post-World War II, and in reality, it was probably St. Augustine 348 years prior, and surely 150 years prior in Pensacola. Third, it is important to have Jewish memories for Jewish continuity. And fourth, because it is timely. With the rise in anti-Semitism, when Jews are even blamed for the coronavirus, and Nazi flags and symbols, and even a Camp Auschwitz shirt were seen during the January 6th domestic attack on our capital, it is important to convey that diversity is strength and what Jews have achieved to improve the quality of life for all. Oops. I lost my share. Okay. January is, as the rabbi indicated, January was Florida Jewish History Month. I worked with the Florida legislature to pass the resolution in 2003, making every January a time to learn about and celebrate the contributions of Jews to the development of the state. In 2019, I worked with the Miami-Dade County Public School System in the Department of Social Studies to develop and distribute a study guide for my book that is now available in all 67 counties for middle and high school students to learn this history. The word history contains the word story. As you know, Jews are storytellers. Little had been revealed up till 1984 when I got involved in the Mosaic Project to research this history. From where I lived in Orlando, I spent the next 8 years on the road, traveling 250,000 miles throughout Florida to set up and manage task forces of volunteers for the grassroots research to collect oral histories, photographs, documents, and artifacts that flesh out this story. Florida has more than 21 million people. That includes about 720,000 Jews, or that makes about 3.4% of the population. To make a comparison, New York has about 1.8 million Jews, or about 8.9% of the population, and California has about almost 1.2 million, or about 3%. Most people think that no one could be a Florida native or surely not have parents and grandparents born in Florida. For nearly 4 decades, I have asked a lot of questions. I get asked, how do you know what you now know? I now know that history is people, people who effect change, who make the world a better place, people who inspire. Being a product of the 1940s and 50s public schools, when I began the research in the 1980s, my inclination was to go to the public library, but there were no books on this subject. I went to the state archives in Tallahassee, and they had nothing, zero. They had 2,000 categories, but nothing called Jews. And this was before Google and Wikipedia, if you can imagine that. So the primary method to research was oral histories. Dr. Sam Proctor was born in Jacksonville and taught Florida history at the University of Florida for 50 years. He was the master of oral history. He trained me how to talk to people, what questions to ask, how to ask, and most importantly, how to listen, which I learned is an art. During the oral history process, I asked for photos and artifacts that supported the stories I was hearing. I did my best to validate the stories and memories of the people interviewed and make connections of families throughout the state. That was one of the most exciting aspects of this. I would interview someone in Tallahassee and remember the similar story and someone in another city and be able to connect them and build family trees for them. An important part of the process was to create a database for computer geeks that was on a 512K Mac, which is featured in the center of this photograph, that came out in 1984. A 10-year-old kid actually taught me how to create a database of what I was finding so I could stop using list on my legal pad. This database was good enough to get the museum accredited by the American Alliance of Museums and continues to be used and expanded. The collections were the source of 85% of the photos for my book. One example, it is 1986, before cell phones, Google, and Wikipedia, and I am in Jacksonville interviewing Rosalie and Robert Lee Coleman about his grandfather, George Dalinski, who is shown on the right side of the photograph. In 1857, yes, you heard me right, 1857, George was the first boy born in Florida to a Jewish family that planted roots in the States and has continued to live here as Jews since 1850. I ask if they have any of George's personal possessions. Rosalie chimes in, I have his pocket watch with Hebrew numerals that he carried his entire life. It's in the safety deposit box at the bank, and no one in the family knows that I have it. He carried it his entire life. Would you like to see it? I say absolutely. And at the bank, I asked if our Mosaic Jewish Life in Florida project could borrow it for display in the traveling exhibition we were going to put together from all this research. She says yes. And then in 1995, when we created the Jewish Museum of Florida on Miami Beach, I asked if she would donate it to the collections. She said yes. I want to emphasize that this is how the material evidence and collective historic memories of more than 250 years of Jewish life in Florida were retrieved, piece by piece. The family continues to live in Jacksonville and has 75 descendants into the 8th generation. And yes, they're still Jewish. I always get asked that. The research findings resulted in the Mosaic traveling exhibit that opened in Miami in 1990 at the Historical Museum and traveled to 13 cities over 4 years. The success of this exhibit and the enthusiasm and press it generated throughout the station and the state and the nation was the impetus to create the Jewish Museum of Florida. In 1992, I was designated the executive director and charged with finding a place. I found these buildings on South Beach in a deteriorated state. The one on the right was about to be torn down, an apartment put up in its place. They were the Orthodox synagogues for the first Jewish congregation on Miami Beach, beginning in 1929. I raised the money to restore and adapt them to a museum. In 1995, the Mosaic exhibit evolved into this Jewish Museum of Florida. No longer wandering Jews, we had a permanent home for the collections and a place to present exhibits and public programs, to tell the stories of one ethnic group in a hugely diverse state. 2020 was our 25th anniversary. Now for some samples of my stories. From my work with Mosaic, I became a Florida history and news junkie and making the Jewish connections to all the stories that we hear on the news. This morning, like every morning, I read the Washington Post on my phone. For the past 8 years, Marty Barron has been executive editor, a position he formerly held at the Miami Herald. In 1954, he was born in Tampa, where he grew up. His parents had immigrated from Israel and had every news resource available in the home so they could learn about their new country. That's how he got interested in journalism. Barron's role as editor of the Boston Globe was highlighted in the movie Spotlight, which I'm sure a lot of you saw. He led the 2003 investigation into the cover-up of sexual abuse by priests within the Boston Archdiocese. Newsrooms under his leadership have won 17 Pulitzer Prizes. Barron retired just 10 days ago, and he will be known for his leadership in the advocacy of press freedoms, reshaping the Post as it transitioned to the digital age, and expanding from local Washington coverage to from local to global. I watch CNN News. 5-time Emmy Award winner Jeff Zucker has been president of CNN Worldwide since 2013. He was born and raised in Miami. His parents, Arlene and Matthew, still live there. In fact, I got this photo from his mother, which is where I got a lot of the photos. He also is retiring this year in December. I checked on my family on the world's largest social network, Facebook. Isn't that how we track our children and grandchildren today? Cheryl Sandberg has been number 2 at Facebook since 2008. She grew up in North Miami Beach and maintains a circle of women friends from middle and high school there. I put on my Spanx bra as I dressed. Founder Sarah Blakely was born and raised in Clearwater and attended Florida State University. In 2000, Oprah Winfrey named Spanx her favorite product, and sales took off, reaching 1 million in its first year and 10 million in its second year. Forbes touted her as the youngest self-made billionaire in the entire world in 2012. Spanx is now available in 50 countries. In my wallet is a $100 bill with Robert Rubin's signature. Rubin was sworn in as the 70th U.S. Secretary of the Treasury in 1995 and served 4 years. As a 4th grader, Rubin moved with his family from New York to Miami Beach. He graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1956 and went on to become a lawyer, banker, and accountant back in New York. Journalists say they would rather tell the story than be the story. One of the most tragic stories is of dual American-Israeli citizen and journalist Stephen Sotloff, shown in the photograph in the center with a helmet on. He was beheaded by ISIS on international television in September of 2014 in Syria. He was born and raised in Miami, a grandson of Holocaust survivors. A UCF University of Central Florida journalism graduate, he studied Hebrew and Arabic in Israel and Yemen so he could tell human interest stories about the Middle East. Look closely at this photo. It shows what Stephen did as a journalist. And that was the challenge I had with finding the right photographs for my book. The family kept giving me headshots of him and pictures of him as a tourist, but I searched 1.5 years to find this photo of showing what he did. Note the paper and pen in his hands and the intensity on his face. You likely remember the news story in October of this past year, 2020, that the U.S. brought 2 ISIS militants to Virginia for a federal trial. These 2 men were part of the group that kidnapped, tortured, and murdered Stephen Sotloff and 3 other Americans. Ivy Seamus, shown in the center, taught a Holocaust class for 17 years at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Her father, Norman Levine, served 2 terms as president of our museum. Of February the 14th, 2018, Ivy said that in class, they were discussing hate groups likely to be on their college campuses and tactics to stand up for what is right. At that moment, loud shots rang out in the hall and the students flew out of their seats and tried to shield themselves, some using Ivy's vast collection of Holocaust books. The shooter appeared at the glass panel in the door, killed 2 students and injured 4 in that very classroom in front of Seamus and her class. 5 of the total 17 dead were Jewish. Seamus asks, how can this happen in, of all places, a classroom where students were learning to combat hate? The lessons of the Holocaust were coming alive right there in room 1214. Most are not aware that Jews could not live in Florida for 250 years after Florida was discovered in 1513. I'm going to repeat that because people are astounded and they don't believe what I'm saying. Yes, Jews were not allowed to live in Florida for 250 years after it was discovered. 1513 is when Ponce de Leon first reached the Florida coast, probably between today's Daytona Beach and Melbourne, found the natives hostile, and named the new land La Florida after Pascua Florida, which means Feast of Flowers, because it was Easter time. Since this was during the Inquisition, which as you remember was 1478 to 1834, and Ponce de Leon sailed for Spain, which then owned Florida, only Catholics could live here for the next 250 years. Until 1763. This is when the Treaty of Paris was signed in Paris, France, following the 7 years or French and Indian War, the final phase of the century-long Anglo-French struggle for colonial and commercial supremacy. In this treaty, Spain ceded Florida to Britain, and people other than Catholics could finally settle, including Jews. These 1765 Pensacola Council minutes reflect the names of 3 Jews who had arrived in 1763. Alexander Solomons, Joseph de Palacios, and Samuel Israel bought property and stores and did business with the British and others, selling wood and dry goods. We've been taught that the first Jews arrived in America in 1654 in New Amsterdam that became New York after sailing from Recife, Brazil to escape the Inquisition there. In the early 1980s, when I began my research, it was my hypothesis that it was possible that Florida Jewish history started here in St. Augustine in 1565, which would mean American Jewish history started here and not in New York. Historians note that the 3rd Florida governor, Pedro Menendez Marquez, could have been a converso, and there are Spanish names on the list of soldiers and settlers in St. Augustine in 1565. Even with continuing pleas, I kept hitting walls when trying to engage serious scholarly study on this subject. Finally, Rabbi Merrill Shapiro heard me. He had been a friend of mine when we both lived in Orlando and had now moved to St. Augustine. And he organized the St. Augustine Jewish Historical Society, and they started digging in and unearthing some very interesting facts. In my book, Rabbi Shapiro presents the first publication of their findings. Florida is often overlooked when writing American Jewish history. You'll read, for example, that Antonio Martinez Carvajal, chief harbor pilot in St. Augustine from 1577 to 1578, was the first person of Jewish descent to live in what would become the United States. That is 77 years prior to the Jews arriving in New York in 1654. We can say that likely the history between 1492 and 1654 needs to be rewritten to include this chapter in Florida in the 16th century. We do know that 200 years ago, 26 years before Florida's 1845 statehood, one Jew took advantage of the development opportunities. No photo exists of Moses Levy, only this drawing created by Chris Monaco based on Levy's writings. In 1820, a year before Florida became a United States territory, Moroccan-born Moses Levy began purchasing 100,000 acres that spread from around Gainesville, south to Sanford, and west to Tampa Bay. Levy formed the Florida Association, which was the first development corporation in all of Florida. His attorney was Alexander Hamilton Jr., who was at that time the U.S. Attorney for East Florida. Moses Levy, the most important person in early Florida history, built his 1,000-acre Pilgrimage plantation just south of Gainesville. Pilgrimage was a fully functioning plantation that lasted from 1822 to 1835. Its main commodity was sugarcane, which Levy reintroduced to Florida. It was intended as a refuge for oppressed European Jews to become farmers in a communitarian settlement, the first on U.S. soil. Felix Warburg of the famous German banking family was his recruiting agent in Europe. At least 5 German Jewish families lived here, including Warburg. In fact, if there's anyone on the talk that went to the University of Florida, you will know there was a Lake Warburg on the campus, and it's named for him. Moses Levy was Florida's first education commissioner, very important, an advocate of public schools and instrumental in establishing Florida's first free public school in St. Augustine. Even in a slave economy, he was a vigorous advocate for gradual abolition of slavery and the humane treatment of enslaved people. For example, he educated his slaves. Moses Levy was the father of David Levy Yulee, the first U.S. senator from Florida and the first Jewish U.S. senator in American history, the first Jew to go to the United States Senate. There have only been 2 Jewish senators from Florida. The second was Miami's Richard Stone, who you'll meet later. He served from 1975 to 1980. David moved to Pilgrimage Plantation to help his father at the age of 17, and he lived there for 4 years. Then he decided he wanted to become an attorney. There were no law schools in that day, so you had to apprentice with another lawyer. So he moved to Tallahassee, where he apprenticed with another attorney and was admitted to the bar in 1836 and got involved in politics. Florida became the 27th state in 1845 with the leadership of David Levy Yulee. He helped draft Florida's Constitution and worked hard for statehood when there were about 60,000 people in Florida. Remember, in the beginning, I said there are now 21 million. 60,000 in 1845, and that included about 100 Jews. He faced anti-Semitism in the U.S. Senate. Vice President John Quincy Adams continuously referred to him as that alien Jew delegate from Florida, even though he had gone through citizenship proceedings twice. He served as senator until the secession of Florida from the Union and served in a Union prison for 1 year. Yulee was the family's ancestral name from Morocco, a name he added to Levy when he went to Washington. David Levy Yulee was important both in politics and the economy because in 1861 he formed Florida Railroad Company, the first railroad system to cross the state. It started in Fernandina on the East Coast and went to Cedar Key on the West Coast. For the first time, goods arriving from Europe could be shipped across the state instead of going all the way around the tip of Florida and coming up the West Coast by ship. The railroad operated for 80 years. In my book, you'll find an interesting story about Confederate gold hidden at another of Yulee's plantations, Cottonwood, near Archer, and also a defense about his conversion. Many people say that he was converted. There is absolutely no evidence. The evidence is that he died a Jew. There are places around Florida named in his honor, and during World War II, there was a U.S. Liberty ship named for him. I'll mention here that Jews Simon and Solomon Benjamin established the Silver Springs, Ocala, and Gulf Railroad in the 1880s in Ocala, and I'm going to talk about this family in a little bit. Moses Levy's plantation was destroyed at the start of the Second Seminole War in 1835. And this is when I introduce another important person in early Florida history, Abraham Myers, for whom the city of Fort Myers is named on the west coast of Florida. This map tells a large story. It reflects the sequence of the earliest documentation of Jewish life in communities around the state. I included photos of Jewish pioneers in each place. So we've talked about Pensacola up on the top left, number 1, 1763. Then we have Micanopy, number 2, in 1819. And that was when Moses Levy started buying his land, and he was actually a founder of the city of Micanopy. Third was Tallahassee in 1837. It had been chosen as the state capital in 1824. Key West in the 1840s, and Jacksonville in 1841. And if you've ever been to the Ellis Island Museum in New York, you'll see there's a big map of the ports of immigration, and 2 of those are in Florida, Jacksonville and Key West. Jews could come, people, not just Jews, could come directly from Europe into the United States through Jacksonville and Key West ports. Then we have number 6, Tampa, which is 1844. It's still 48 years before South Florida. I haven't mentioned South Florida yet. There was no South Florida. I want to emphasize that. At this time, there was no South Florida. Ocala, where you are located in that area, 1850s, we have the first Jews before the Civil War. Orlando, 1865. Palm Beach, 1892, and Miami, 1892. Now, finally, we get to South Florida because this is when Henry Flagler brought his railroad down the East Coast. First to St. Augustine, and then Daytona Beach, and then down to West Palm Beach by 1894, and then to Miami by 1896. And that's what opened up East Florida. West Florida was opened up by Henry Plant with his railroad. East Coast was Henry Flagler. Then we have Jews in St. Petersburg, where I live, in 1901. Then the first Jews in Broward County were in Davie by 1910. Sarasota and Miami Beach, 1913. Fort Lauderdale, 1915. And this was the biggest surprise to me. Boca Raton, which now hosts the state's largest Jewish population, was the last city to develop, to have Jews settle there. And that was not till 1931. I want to tell you another story of how I retrieved this history and pieced it together like a mosaic. And it originates with your surrounding area of Ocala. As I mentioned in the beginning, I traveled 250,000 miles going to all the cities to find people to tell me stories. So when I went to Ocala in the mid-1980s, I got this photo from Stanley Maliver, who said this was his grandfather's store. A few weeks later, I showed this photo at a Jewish Federation meeting in Tampa. And a woman by the name of Nell Friedman was sitting on the first row, and she gets up and she says, "Marcia, you are wrong. This was my Uncle Marcus Frank's store." And if you look closely, it's hard to see in this picture, but the sign in the red circle says Frank's. And she said to me, "Go find my cousin in Fort Lauderdale, Ruth Frank Gross. She was born in Ocala, and she is Marcus's daughter, and she will validate what I'm telling you." So the very next day, I had task forces in all the communities, 30 communities around Florida. The very next day, I was in Fort Lauderdale. I walked into the JCC for my task force meeting, and who was sitting around the table but this woman that I had never seen before, and her name was Ruth Frank Gross. These are things that happened to me serendipitously as I was doing this research. So she said, wait a minute, I'm going to run home and get my scrapbook. So she brings back the scrapbook, and in it, she had a picture, this picture that shows in the center Isidore Cohen. Now, at the time, in the 1980s, when I was doing this, there were about 300,000 Jews in Miami, but no one had a photo of the first permanent Jew to settle there, who was Isidore Cohen. Yet Ruth had it. And this photo led me to the story of the earliest Jews in Miami. And the reason she had the photo is that Marcus Frank, who now was switching back to Ocala, who owned that store, and he's shown here on the right. This is Marcus Frank on the right. When he got married, Isidore Cohen served as his best man because his father, Julius Frank, and his mother, Julius and Julia, had settled in Miami in 1896, and Julius was killed in a fire in 1896. So when he went to get married, he had Isidore Cohen, who was Julius Frank's friend in Miami, be in his best man. And that's why Ruth Frank Gross had many pictures of Isidore Cohen in her scrapbook. These men, on the left is Jacob Schneidman, and then Isidore Cohen and Marcus Frank. These men all had stores first in West Palm Beach. Remember I said the railroad came first to West Palm Beach, and then they moved on to Miami in 1896. Ruth's father, Marcus Frank, the one that had the store, left Miami after 2 deaths in the family and went back to West Palm Beach, where the family had a store before, as I mentioned, and he opened another store. But the newspaper editor there was very anti-Semitic, and he kept harassing Marcus and especially his mother because they were Jewish. So one day he came into the store, and Marcus took a pistol from under the cash register and shot and killed the editor, Cy Gardner. And the most amazing thing in this article is reflective of that. He was acquitted because people came forth and testified that Marcus was a good person. And the reason this happened is that the editor had been anti-Semitic and had taunted the family unmercifully, and the editor deserved it. So after all of this, he went to Ocala in 1900 and opened a store. Marcus Frank was important in Ocala politics. He was on the city council for 16 years, in the state legislature in 1939, and then again in 1949. And there's a wonderful story that he even got 800 votes after he died. So that doesn't happen just in Chicago. And he has the largest tombstone in the Ocala Jewish Cemetery. If you haven't been to the Ocala Jewish Cemetery, that's how I would get the sequence of the pioneers. I would go to the cemetery and read the stones. So I would suggest you do that if you're interested in this history. So I was able to confirm, after all of these stories and photographs, that the store did in fact originate with Marcus Frank. And then when he got more successful, he moved up the street and he sold it to Mr. Maliver. And so when Stanley Maliver gave me this photograph, he did not know all of the story. He just knew that it was his grandfather's store. And he hadn't even noticed that it said Frank's on the front. So in that process, I obtained the earliest Jewish history of Miami, which no one in Miami had. This detective work energized me to keep going. I just loved it. The Moses and David Levy family is no longer Jewish. Remember, I talked about them in the beginning. So who is the longest continuing Jewish family in Florida? The answer is the Dalinski family, who came by 1850. I showed you George's watch. It connects back to that. Philip Dalinski, shown in the top left, was the first to arrive in the family in Jacksonville. He brought the father. The mother had died coming across from Europe on the ship. He brought his father and 8 brothers and sisters. Philip married a Jewish woman, Ida Ehrlich. Their children born in Jacksonville were George. He's shown here in this photograph in the top center on the chair. That was his pocket watch that I showed you earlier. And this is his sister, Regina, who was born 2 years later in 1859. In the 1880s, Philip's brother Morris, shown here in the top right, was the mayor of Jacksonville and the first president of Ahava Chesed in Jacksonville, which was the second congregation. I will talk about the congregations in a little bit. The lower right is his sister, Helena. Remember I said there were 9 children altogether? So she was one of the 9, Helena. Helena married Robert Williams, a Jewish businessman and cotton plantation owner in Tallahassee. They had 5 daughters, and this is what truly amazed me in doing this history, is that even though there were so few Jews in Florida in the 19th century, they found other Jews to marry. This couple, Helena and Robert Williams, had 5 girls, and they all married Jews, which was a tremendous statement of their adherence to tradition. This is an 1897 photo of their family in front of their home in Tallahassee. In the early days of my research, I found that Helena and Robert Williams' first daughter, Rachel, was actually the first child born in the family. Remember I said that George with the pocket watch was the first boy? Well, I later found out that a girl was born before him. And no one in the family had a photograph of Rachel, which was devastating to me because I'm basing all my history on the visual evidence. You can't create exhibits about Jews in Florida if you don't have a photograph or an artifact, something to show that these people really existed. And it was not until December of 2018 that I got this photo that I was seeking for 35 years. In spite of not being wanted, Jews have hugely contributed to the history, development, and fun facts of the Sunshine State. There are many firsts that I reveal in my book. Another daughter of Helena and Robert Williams was Mina Williams, a third-generation Floridian Jew already by 1885, and was the first Miss Florida, honest to goodness. Do you love her outfit? Another major pioneer family are the Benjamins. Born in Prussia, Simon Benjamin, shown in the top left, immigrated to Florida in 1865. He came to Alachua County to establish a business in the village of Waldo. Simon stayed in Waldo for 3 years until he was literally run out of town by the Ku Klux Klan and moved to Ocala because there were already family members there. Remember, I said there were Jews in Ocala beginning in the 1850s, and they were mostly his family. By 1870, they comprised the 6 Jewish-sounding names in the Marion County census. He and other family members opened Florida's first known ice-making plant and cold storage facility at the railroad junction, which facilitated rapid transport. I just love this photograph. You see the ice piled up there on the deck, and you can see the railroad track coming right by. Imagine, this was a time when there were no refrigerators in which to store and preserve meats or electricity to operate them, even if they had existed. Many homes contained ice boxes, and the Benjamin delivered ice on wagons. Simon was president of the temple there for 10 years in Ocala and on the Marion County Commission. As a matter of fact, he donated the land. The rabbi mentioned in the beginning that the oldest extant synagogue in Florida is the one in Ocala, and I'm going to show you that shortly. But this man donated the land and was president for 10 years, as was his brother Solomon, also on the county commission, and Simon was also on the school board. So the point I want to make through the Dalinski family and the Benjamin families as examples, that these families, especially the men at that time, were very involved in politics, religion, and civically. They were involved across the board. Simon Benjamin moved to Jacksonville in 1901, began a cigar and tobacco business, and served as president of the synagogue there, the one that Morris Dalinski had been the first president, Ahaveth Hesed. He served as president of a temple again. His son Roy, shown in the left circle, became an architect who was acclaimed for his theaters. He designed more than 200 movie theaters, one in nearly every Florida town, including in 1934, this Art Deco classic Colony Theater, which is on Lincoln Road on Miami Beach. If any of you have walked on Lincoln Road, you've seen this theater. The stories go on, and they're so much fun. Meet Saul Snyder, cattleman in St. Augustine. In 1904, after serving in the Russian army, he left and was sent by the Jewish Agricultural Society to Fernandina Beach. Then in 1908, he settled in St. Augustine. Why? Because there were 9 Jews in St. Augustine, and they said to Saul, come to St. Augustine, we'll help you get started in a little store. So he made the 10th man for the minion. His cattle brand was the Mogan David, and his name was Bar Mitzvah. He started with a little store, and then he bought 1 cow, and then he became a rancher and was the founder of the Florida Cattlemen's Association in the 1950s, when cattle was the state's largest industry. Jews have, from the beginning, made a living in retail and wholesale goods, first as peddlers. Then the peddlers transitioned into retail stores, like this early one in Orlando in 1884. You can't see the store, but you can see the billboard. If you follow the red arrow in the center, you see Schutz Brothers grand opening. They had a dry goods store. And I just love this photo because it's market day in Orlando, in downtown Orlando. And there's cows, see them, they're bringing their cows to market. And you see a man on the dragging an alligator in the front right. I love finding photographs like this. This is a gem. There were traditional mom and pop stores around 130 years ago. This is the Canner family from Hush, Romania. And this is another fabulous story. There were 8 brothers and sisters who came to Florida in the 1880s and settled in 8 different Florida towns so they would not compete with each other. This is the family in Orlando in 1905 in their store, typical of the dry goods stores of the Florida Jewish immigrants. I just love them. All the inventory is so neatly stacked. They all look like this. The 5th generation of this family is living in Miami today. The sons of a cantor in Germany, the Reinauer brothers, arrived in Ocala in 1880 and opened a general store on the public square at a time when there were wooden sidewalks and sand streets where livestock roamed free. This is how they described Ocala when they got there. The brothers became prosperous by selling groceries, then clothing and dry goods, and evolved into a department store. Reinauers remained at their location for more than 50 years before relocating to the Ocala Shopping Center. The store continued in business until 1997, when Reinauer and Company ended their 117-year history of doing business in Ocala, and then it became a chain of stores throughout Florida. The brothers also took an active part in the cigar business in the 1880s and 1890s. And Benjamin was co-founder of the first bank in Ocala, the Bank of Ocala, later the Merchants National Bank. Benjamin will be remembered best, perhaps, as the father of what is now Monroe Regional Medical Center. He witnessed a bloody accident in front of his store where a pedestrian lost a leg, and he helped carry the man to an upstairs doctor's office. That marked the beginning of his long struggle to organize a hospital in Ocala. Then there were larger department stores opened by Florida Jews. Isaac Maas worked for the Reinauers in Ocala and then joined his brother Abe in Tampa in 1895. They came from Germany in 1894. The first Maas Brothers store was in 1896 and became a chain of 39 stores that lasted 105 years and is now incorporated into the Macy's chain. Samuel and Morris Cohen arrived from Ireland to Jacksonville in 1867, when Jacksonville was still under military occupation from the Civil War, and established the Cohen Brothers store. It was small in the beginning. They instituted fixed pricing rather than the typical bargaining. And then in 1912, they built this mammoth department store occupying an entire city block. It was the largest structure in the city, and at one time was the 9th largest department store in the United States. In business for 120 years, the building is now Jacksonville's City Hall. And then Jews developed shopping centers like University Town Center in Sarasota, developed by Nathan Benderson, one of the nation's newest shopping malls and recognized as one of the most ambitious retail projects of its kind in the United States. And Aventura Mall, owned by the Sofer family, Florida's largest mall, it's located in Miami, and the second largest in the nation. It has more than 3 million square feet. And talk about largest, Auschwitz survivor Tibor Hollow, shown in the top right, arrived in New York in 1945 with $18. You've heard these stories about Holocaust survivors. This is a real one. $18 in his pocket, arrives in 1945. In 2018, he opened the tallest building in Florida at 868 feet and 85 stories in Miami, with a 2,000 car parking garage at a cost of $800 million. We think that's really big, right? And then consider New York's 28-acre, 25-plus billion-dollar Hudson Yards project in New York City, as the press calls it, a nation state for the 1%, brought to you by the most powerful city shaper in modern times. Stephen Ross graduated from Miami Beach High School in 1958, attended the University of Florida, and became the founding chair of the related companies. Ross is shown here standing on the highest outdoor observation deck in the Western Hemisphere at his Hudson Yards. Ross also owns the NFL Miami Dolphins football team, the first professional sports team in Florida, as well as the Hard Rock Stadium that is home to the Dolphins, the University of Miami's Hurricanes, Super Bowls, and many global events. Like many of you, I follow all of Florida's sports teams, many owned by Jews. In Miami, there is also the Heat basketball, owned by Mickey Arison, and Marlins baseball, which Jeffrey Loria sold to Bruce Sherman, another Jewish owner of Naples, in 2017. And Alan Cohen once owned the Panthers ice hockey team. Where I live in Tampa Bay, all three sports teams are owned by Jews, and this has been a banner year for us. The Lightning won the NHL Stanley Cup. The Rays went to the World Series, and probably most of you know that the Bucks won the Super Bowl on February the 7th. The big sports news in your area was the racehorse Affirmed, who won the Triple Crown in 1978. The horse was bred by Jacksonville's Lewis and Patrice Wolfson and trained at their Harbor View farm in Ocala. In this sport, older than baseball, this title is a first for a Florida Jew, and it was held for nearly 40 years. Wolfson had moved with his family to Jacksonville at the age of 1 and was an outstanding business tycoon. When I read about trips to and from the International Space Station, I recall that Harry Kaplan of Melbourne helped develop the spacesuits the astronauts wore, and that many Jews were involved in leadership positions at Cape Canaveral and the Martin Company, and that the fresh veggies the astronauts eat in space were developed by Betty and Ed Rosenthal of Sarasota, founders of Floricon Fertilizer Corporation, selected as a collaborator with NASA. Look at Betty's feet in this photograph in the red circle. Those are her feet to show the proportion of the size of the red romaine lettuce. Using the Rosenthal's controlled release fertilizer, this humongous lettuce was the first crop grown in space in just 3 weeks from seed and consumed by the astronauts. I want to emphasize that Jews have been notable in agriculture in Florida. When immigrants came from Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they mostly had come from places where Jews could not own land or be farmers. So working the land was an attractive way to be independent, to support their families. Tobacco and cigars were a large part of the Florida Jewish story. Jews grew tobacco in North Florida beginning in the late 19th century, especially in Tallahassee and Quincy. In Ocala, there were 13 cigar factories. German immigrants Charles and Hannah Pizer settled in Ocala around 1860, when Charles began manufacturing El Tropico cigars, using both imported Cuban tobacco as well as locally produced tobacco. Their son Nathan, that's Charles shown in the center behind the counter, and that's his son Nathan on the right. Nathan was a salesman. The store was open until 1920. When I was researching in Ocala, I found a very interesting article about Pisner in the 1905 Ocala Evening Star. Pizer had received a late order for his celebrated Grand Royal cigars to be distributed at a banquet for Florida physicians. And as the physicians opened their boxes for a fragrant smoke, they saw his printed card. That would have been a great artifact to be able to get, smokes for physicians. Of course, they didn't know at that time that smoking was bad for your health. Most cigar factories were in Key West in the 1880s, then moved to Ybor City in 1891. In the book, I tell you why. This factory and label belonged to the oldest family-owned cigar maker in the United States, now into its 4th generation, and is the last cigar factory in Tampa today that once had 150 factories, cigar factories in Ybor City, many owned by Jews. Note the label, the Mogen David around the woman's neck, that because there was a picture of the family's grandmother and that she has the Mogen David around her neck. This brand is sold in 80 countries. The earliest citrus king in Florida was Dr. Philip Phillips in the Orlando area. In 1897, he was the first known Jew to permanently settle there. By the early 1920s, he developed 5,000 acres stretching across 9 central Florida counties. This made Phillips the largest individual citrus grower in the entire world. He was responsible for several key innovations in the processing and packaging of orange juice. He sold to Minute Maid in 1954 and formed a foundation that supports many medical, cultural, and educational facilities in Central Florida. The collage in the lower right portion of the photograph reflects places named to honor his generosity, including in the lower right, the Orlando Performing Arts Center. He was inducted into the Florida Citrus Hall of Fame in 1986. Brothers Jules and Jack Freeman settled in Florida in 1953 with $10,000 and developed the largest orange grove in the world at that time, 4 million trees, 37 square miles, which it's about 640 acres per square mile. So it's about 24,000 acres along State Road 70, goes across the middle of the state. They accumulated, developed, and sold a total of 89,000 acres or 139 square miles, which to compare, it's 6 times the size of Manhattan. That is nearly 23 square miles. So they had 139 square miles. Driving on I-75 on the West Coast, you pass 2 cities developed by Jews. One is the Freeman's San Carlos Park, which was built in 1955, south of Fort Myers. Today, there are 25,000 residents. Also on I-75 on the West Coast, you pass Cape Coral, which is a 114 square mile city developed by Leonard and Julius Rosen, also in Lee County in the 1950s. Today, it has more than 150,000 total population. It includes 35,000 waterfront homes, making it among the largest municipal-sized developments with waterfront in the entire country. In the area of construction, look at this view of Miami Beach hotels, the Eden Rock and Fontainebleau in the foreground, and realize that those 2 and so many others were built by Jews, including the architecture, construction, and preservation of Art Deco hotels on Miami Beach. Jews have developed cities and towns all over Florida, and we have causeways and bridges named for Jews who have contributed much to the development of the state. I am asked, why is there a photo of a cruise ship on the cover? They are major economic drivers for our state, bringing in more than $8 billion annually, and I refer that figure to the pre-COVID times. Florida is the nation's #1 cruise state, often referred to as the cruise capital of the world. Today, there are 3 major public cruise lines, and all 3 are chaired by Floridian Jews. Mickey Arison at Carnival, Richard Fain at Royal Caribbean, and Russell Galbert at Norwegian. Jewish communal organizations are formed to perpetuate Jewish life, culture, and traditions to help ensure Jewish continuity. Florida's first Jewish organization was the 1857 Jacksonville Cemetery, founded after 6 members of the Dalinski family died during a yellow fever epidemic. Until that time, bodies had been shipped out of state for Jewish burial. By 1873, there were enough Jews in Ocala to organize a cemetery. Louis Fox, Nathan Crown, and Herman Schwerin purchased the land. Bertha Schwerin is the earliest grave. That year in 1873, she died at the age of 31. Then came congregations that built synagogues. This was the first, Bethel, Pensacola in 1876, which was reformed. By 1900, there were 6 Jewish congregations in Florida. They all remain in existence. We have Temple Beth El in Pensacola, followed by Haveth Hesed that I've mentioned a couple times, formed in Jacksonville in 1882. Rodef Shalom renamed B'nai Zion in Key West in 1887, and the United Hebrews of Ocala in 1888, where you are, and then Sher Zedek in Tampa in 1894, and B'nai Israel, a second congregation in Pensacola by 1899. So those are the first 6. At 729 Northeast 2nd Avenue, 2nd Street in Ocala, we have the oldest extant synagogue in Florida. The rabbi referred to that in the beginning. I was told, as I mentioned, that Simon Benjamin donated the land for the congregation that was founded in 1873, the same year as the cemetery, as United Hebrews of Ocala. They built this synagogue in 1888, changed the name in 1963 to Temple B'nai Darom, which of course means Children of the South, which you see over the door. And the building is now Ocala Bible Chapel, which you see on the right. The photo on the left is 1976, when Leon Goldman and Jacob Weiner were carrying the Torahs to move to their new building on Banyan Course. In 2018, they moved to another building at Southwest 38th Street with 70 member families. In 1975, there was a split to Temple Beth Shalom over who should be the spiritual leader, an ordained rabbi or continue with their lay leader, Samuel F., who was a chemistry professor. Temple Beth Shalom started with 25 families, and both congregations are Reform. During my research, I heard many wonderful stories about Torahs. This one that I'm going to share with you was told to me by Charlotte Winkle in Sarasota when I was speaking at a temple there in the 1980s. In 1897, which was 100 years before the story that she's telling, it's 100 years before I'm getting the story from the daughter, in Russia, her father, Marcus Winkle, got his order to serve in the Tsar's army, which usually meant death, and which was the impetus for many, many Russian Jews to come to America. Probably many in your family, certainly in mine. They came at a young age because they didn't want to be drafted. To avoid conscription, the family told the authorities that he had suddenly died of a high fever, which was not unusual in that day, and they actually buried him alive. Of course, they buried him very loosely and punched holes in the dirt so he could breathe. And then soon after the funeral, he was dug out by his friends. The family was very Zionist. They already had land in Palestine. So they left in a tree, behind a tree near the grave, this Torah and money and clothing, the pants that you see there. His mother had made those pants out of potato bags. And he picked those up and he traveled to Palestine because that was the plan, that he would be able to live off family money that was deposited in the bank in Jaffa. His parents, as I mentioned, were great Zionists. So he went to Palestine, he walked through Russia, walked through Turkey, got on a boat to go to Palestine. He became a sheep herder there. But soon the bank where his father deposited the money failed, and the Arabs were killing his sheep. So he trudged back to Russia to tell his family that he was going to America. I try to explain when I'm telling this story to bar and bar mitzvah students is that he couldn't email his parents, he couldn't text his parents, he couldn't even telegram his parents or send a letter. This was in the 1890s. He only could have to go back physically to tell his parents that he was going to come to America, because when he was in Palestine, he learned that was the really only safe place for Jews. And he heard about a place called Florida. So he came to Moffett, Florida, which is just a little east of Sarasota, and he opened a lumber mill. Now, I want to point out that he's carrying this Torah. It's a personal size Torah. It's a little smaller than the one you probably use in the synagogue. But he carried this Torah all the way to Palestine, back to Russia, and then to Moffett, Florida. He was lonely, so he went to New York for a shidduch. And he was married to Hannah Rutkowski, who was a daughter of a founder of Yeshiva University. So imagine he brings this very religious woman to Moffett, Florida. On the left, you see a photograph of Hannah with the 2 children, Abe on the left and Charlotte on the right, who's telling me the story. And then she proceeds to tell me that one day in the lumber mill, Hannah stepped on a rusty nail, and the mill hands, just trying to be really helpful, grabbed a piece of salt pork and wrapped it around her foot because it would draw out the infection. But Hannah was kosher and could not stand pork just even touching her body. So that was the impetus that she was able to be successful in her pleas to Marcus to please move to Jacksonville, which was the largest Jewish community in Florida at that time. Until the 1930s, Jacksonville had the largest Jewish community in the state. So Charlotte tells me this whole story, and she said the Torah is in one of the congregations, one of the synagogues in Jacksonville, and she described it to me. It had a broken wooden finial. So I went to all the rabbis and they were very helpful. They all went through all their tours with me. And I finally found the Winkle tour in the Jacksonville Jewish Center, which is the conservative congregation. And they loaned us to us, just like the watch, they loaned it to us for the traveling exhibition. And then when we became a museum, I went back to the board of the congregation and they donated the Torah to the museum. So on the right, you can see how the Torah is installed at the museum. We just celebrated Purim. Beginning in 1880, Purim balls were held in the pioneer Jewish communities of Tallahassee, Pensacola, Key West, and Jacksonville. In 1918, Fannie Moss spent months collecting all these seashells to make this dress for her YMHA, Young Hebrew Men's Association, Purim party. Again, it was 1918. Continuing Jewish traditions and continuity, also from the book cover, you see in the top left this 1920 photo of a couple on an alligator. The alligator is a symbol of Florida. And in my collecting, I found hundreds of people with pictures on alligators, brides and grooms, which this was, little boys, mayors, many couples at different stages of their marriage, all shown on alligator. This couple were founders of Temple Israel, which is the first congregation in Palm Beach, where David owned a florist shop on Worth Avenue. Gertrude was a daughter of Rosa Benjamin and Jacob Katz, who had a very large Jewish wedding in Micanopy in 1886. These are their wedding photos. And you can surmise from the space devoted to the event on the front page of the Micanopy Gazette that the wedding was a big deal in 1886, probably the first Jewish wedding in Micanopy. 3 years later, this is the Israel Brown ketubah of a wedding in Ocala in 1889. By this time, there were about 100 Jews in Ocala. So this was truly a community event. The translation says, today, the 7th of the month of Adar Sheni, 5649, according to the Jewish reckoning, which is corresponding to 19 March 1889 civil reckoning, here in the city of Ocala, in the state of Florida, Mr. Israel Brown, son of Julius Brown, said to the Virgin Gertrude Israel, daughter of Julius Israel, be thou my wife in accordance with the laws of Moses in Israel, and I will work for thee, hold thee in honor, love, support, and maintain thee in accordance with the custom of Jewish husbands. Miss Gertrude Israel, on her part, consented to become his wife and promised to love and respect him, to stand at his side as a true Jewish wife, and to fulfill unto him all the duties incumbent upon a Jewish wife. After these declarations and assurances, I, Joseph Kahn, Rabbi of Congregation Ahaveth Hesed of Jacksonville, Florida, have joined together in the holy estate of matrimony the said Mr. Israel Brown and Miss Gertrude Israel, both of Ocala, Florida. In witness have affixed my signature, the signatures of the said bride and groom, and 2 witnesses, and it's signed Gertrude Israel, Israel Brown, Philip Walter, Z. Brown, Rabbi J. Kahn. There had been other weddings in Ocala prior to this in the Benjamin and Fox families in 1882 and 1887 with Rabbi Benjamin Rubin. Here is an early news article about a bris in Sanford in 1883, written in wonderful flowery Victorian style. It includes that the rabbi was brought from Jacksonville by boat. That would have been up the St. Johns River. And then on the right, you have Miami's first bris in 1907 of Isidore and Ida Cohen. Remember I introduced you to Isidore Cohen earlier, the first permanent Jewish settler? Well, this is their son's bris, Eddie. The rabbi came from Key West, also by boat. So that took longer time than to come from Jacksonville. This was a major event, and the courts closed in Miami. I devote 13 pages of the book to Jews in politics. You will find the volume of names astounding on the list of federal and state legislators and mayors. Jacob R. Cohen had a store in Orlando by 1873 and got politically active to form a city government, serving as secretary for the organizing Orlando Town Council and elected alderman. Several years later, he married Rachel Williams. You remember the picture I showed you that took me 35 years to get? Well, she's in Tallahassee. He's in Orlando. They find each other. They get married. So he moves to Tallahassee, and again, he gets involved in politics. And Cohen conducted the first statewide campaign for Jews in Palestine in 1915. 1915, he raised $10,000. This was 20 years before the first Jewish Federation was organized in Florida, which was in Jacksonville in 1935. The first Jewish mayor of more than 200 that I found in Florida was Henry Brash. Elected in 1879, he served 3 terms in Mariana, then moved to Tampa with his family. Many early Florida mayors were Jewish because they were respected, trusted, good speakers, and considered highly educated. I traced 2 Jewish mayors in Ocala. Michael Fischel came in 1887, had a dry goods store on North Magnolia, was president of the temple and mayor from 1900 to 1902. And Charles Reinhauer, I mentioned Reinhauer's and Company department store. Charles was mayor of Ocala in 1906. Florida's had 1 Jewish governor, Governor David Schultz from Daytona. He was inaugurated in 1933. Now, early on, I mentioned that, I don't know if I mentioned, but I used to put together these pictures. I used to make them into slides. In 1980s, there was no digital. So I would make slides and I would schlep this slide projector, this heavy slide projector from community to community to show pictures that I had and get more stories. That's how I got my stories. So I went to Gainesville when I was invited by a group of history professors, and I showed this picture as our Jewish governor. And one of the history professors said, Marcia, this is a very important historical photograph. This was taken February the 15th of 1933. Schultz is shown in the center, and in the front, you'll see President-elect Franklin Roosevelt. In those days, inaugurations were still in March. So he was not yet, this was February, so he was not yet president. And on the right, in the back seat there, on your right, is the Chicago mayor, Anton Cermak. Now, Rabbi, you mentioned that you're from Chicago. I don't know if you remember this, heard this story, but Cermak was shot in an assassination attempt of Roosevelt. This is in Bayfront Park in Miami. Cermak died of his wounds. Giuseppe Zangara was convicted of murder and electrocuted in 1 month. So I got this whole story by showing this photograph in Gainesville. David Schultz served 4 years. A dynamic public speaker, he took the reins of state government when the worst effects of the Depression were being felt in Florida. He paid the bills, distributed free school books, gave more money to schools, and started commissions to serve the public good. We've had nearly 300 Jewish judges to the present. 5 Jews have served on Florida's Supreme Court, all served as Chief Justice, except for Robert Luck, who was confirmed last year by the U.S. Senate as a judge on the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, where he now serves. There is such a variety of stories in my book, like this 1966 U.S. postage stamp that is the first of a living person. Lou Jacob of Sarasota was a master clown who performed for the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus for 60 years, and was a founder of the Clown College in Florida. In the 1980s, as I gathered photographs, I mentioned I would schlep the slide projector from community to community. And Sarasota seemed to be a ripe territory for me for stories. I showed this again at another time in Sarasota. And as I said, these treks were very productive. This is a typical German Jewish family, the Gundersheimers, who arrived in Milton 15 years before the Civil War. I learned that Anna, shown in the red circle, had married a Russian Jew, Jacob Barker. Their son, Bernard Barker, lived in Cuba, married, and in 1917, they had Bernard Barker Jr. Bernard Barker Jr. That name sounded so familiar. Does it sound familiar to any of you? Do you know it? He was the plumber in the Watergate break-in in the Democratic headquarters of 1972. Ann Shops, who was on my committee in Pensacola, saw her cousin come into Temple one Shabbat when the prisoners from Eglin Federal Prison were attended. He was born in Cuba. He had moved to Miami in 1960 and first been recruited by E. Howard Hunt as an undercover operative in the CIA, directed plots to overthrow Cuban leader Fidel Castro at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. And then he was recruited for Watergate. After prison, he worked as a building inspector for the city of Miami. He died in 2009. His descendants are still in Pensacola, and yes, they're still Jewish. Some Florida Jews are famous, and some are infamous, like Meyer Lansky. whose career was crime, but the government could never convict him. He is well known in the building that became the Jewish Museum of Florida. Remember, I said it was an Orthodox synagogue. He was a member of that synagogue, and there is a stained glass window, as you see here, dedicated to him. The photograph of him here is the chairman of the board, that's how he was referred to, is with his sons, Paul and Buddy, taken in Miami Beach in 1942. He had a home on Miami Beach since the 1930s when he began his gambling there. I wrote a lot about him in the book because there seems to be a fascination with mobsters. He died at Mount Sinai Hospital on Miami Beach at the age of 81 in 1983. I get asked a lot about his sons, if they went into the family business. Buddy had cerebral palsy and died in 1989. Paul went to West Point and in 1962 was sent by President John Kennedy to Vietnam as an advisor. He also worked for NASA's Apollo space program. There is a daughter, Sandra, who wrote a book about her dad, if you want to look it up. Anti-Semitism has grown globally by 18% in the past year. In my book, I use the word anti-Semitism more than 50 times because that was the driving force that propelled Jews to move from place to place over history. I discuss the dark side of the Jewish experience in Florida. Anti-Semitism historically occurs in eras of great change where people are feeling very anxious and threatened by technological, economic, and industrial change and pandemics, going back to the time of the medieval blood libels and plagues in Europe when Jews were blamed. Like COVID-19, anti-Semitism is a virus that mutates with each generation, and again, the Jews are blamed. We've seen a tsunami of anti-Semitic hatred on the internet and social media that baselessly blames Jews for having invented the coronavirus, for intentionally spreading it, profiting from it, or using it as a tool for global control. Often Jews escaping persecution in Europe faced anti-Semitism again when they settled in Florida, like this early case of Samuel Fleischman, who was murdered for giving credit to freed slaves in 1869. Remember, Florida was created with discrimination. Jews could not live here for 250 years after its discovery. Today, Florida has the second largest number of hate groups, 67, second largest in the nation after California. And it comes California, Florida, Texas, and then New York. And the world's first website devoted to the agenda of hatred in cyberspace was launched in 1995 right here in Florida in Palm Beach. These kinds of discriminatory signs were seen all over Florida until a state law in 1949 made them illegal. Both of these images are from the late 1930s in Miami. Jews organized, overcame the discrimination, and were successful. They made it comfortable for Jews to live in Florida today as Jews. Knowledge of the ginormous contributions in every area of the development and success of Florida strengthens Jewish identity and provides information and tools to combat the resurgence of anti-Semitism. My book is one tool to use against this hatred because it presents the evidence. I grew up during the age of Hitler and the Holocaust, when many Jews followed the Shah still philosophy of hush, don't brag or talk about what Jews have accomplished. They thought this would quell the hatred. Well, that didn't work, did it? Jews are still hated as we have been for 2,000 years. There is a parallel between the ancient forces of xenophobia that drove Jews out of 109 countries, that prevented them from residing in Florida for 250 years after settlement began, and even some Florida cities in modern history, and what is happening today, when Jews are blamed for all the ills of the world. We know about the hotel restrictions on Miami Beach as portrayed in the 1947 film Gentleman's Agreement. There were the same restrictions around the state. In the top left, Hotel Relum, which is right here on the beach, was on the beach where I live in St. Pete Beach. That was created in response to restricted policies of the area's Jews. In 1940, there were no places for Jewish visitors to stay in this entire area. So Harriet and Jacob Miller said the beaches need to be for everyone. And they tried to buy land to build a Jewish hotel, but they were rejected. And then they used the name Relum, which is Miller spelled backwards, and they were successful. In the lower right is the Blackstone Hotel. In 1928, while on vacation on Miami Beach, Nathan Stone was unable to obtain a room because of anti-Semitic policies. Stone purchased the land at Washington Avenue and 8th Street and built a hotel that welcomed Jews and Blacks. In 1977, Miami's Richard Stone, grandson of Nathan Stone and Florida's second Jewish U.S. Senator, presented the Silver Star to Herman Edelstein. 60 years after Edelstein was denied the honor due to an anti-Semitic army commanding officer. Jews will continue to labor to make this world a better place for everyone, including those who hate us. Even though Jews are less than 1/4% of the global population, Jews have been awarded 22% of all the Nobel Prizes. 2 of those Nobels were awarded to Floridian Jews. Marshall Nirenberg of Orlando, and a 1948 graduate of the University of Florida, received the 1968 Nobel Prize in Medicine or Physiology for interpretation of the genetic code and its function in protein synthesis. He died in January of 2010, and his wife donated his papers to the Jewish Museum of Florida. On the right, you recognize Isaac Bashevis Singer of Miami Beach, receiving the 1978 Nobel Prize in Literature. We remain minute in number, but mighty in our contributions to humanity. Are there any golfers in the group tonight? I understand most people moved to the villages to play golf. Florida has more golf courses than any other state. I think it's about 1,400 at last count. And the sport has a rich history. This is in Ocala in 1880. Jews settled there, as I mentioned, before the Civil War. People in ice making, cigar manufacturing, banking, railroad building, retail, politics, teaching, insurance, and even a saloonist made up the Jewish population of about 100 in Ocala in 1900. The growth of the area slowed due to the collapse of the phosphate boom, killing frost, and the effects of the Spanish-American War. Ocala Jews, like all Floridians, experienced turbulence during the state's early entrance into the Great Depression in 1926, and some left to seek employment elsewhere. The Jewish population declined in Ocala to 6 families in the 1940s, revived again, and in 1990 was about 350 families. People are still playing golf in the 21st century, and the Jewish landscape of Marion County is changing with the emergence of the villages, top of the world, and other retirement areas. I don't know what the population today is. Rabbi probably knows. It also has gained new congregations in the 21st century, including Congregation Beth Israel, Temple Shalom of Central Florida, and Chabad, of course. Jews are like cut flowers. We die without roots. These stories are our collective historic memories, our roots. I've shared much less than 1% of the stories I gathered in my 35 years of research throughout Florida, and about 8% of the images in my book. What I learned is that history helps us understand society and change. Our memories of history are what define us. We need to hear the stories, preserve them, and pass them down to those who follow us. The stories of people inspire us to take action in our own lives. I hope these stories add some joy and meaning to your life. It is my wish that you will share these centuries of stories and keep them alive to help ensure Jewish continuity. The book about Jews coming to America and in Florida is a long time coming testament to the contributions of Florida Jews and crucial to understanding Florida, American, and American Jewish history. It's about our family. I used the word family in the book more than 500 times. When I was growing up and a story appeared in the news, the family would gather and ask, is it good for the Jews? I think the knowledge of this history is good for the Jews. Yes, now you know that Florida Jews have deep roots, and I hope this gives you a tremendous sense of pride. At this time in my book talk, if I'm doing it live and not over Zoom, I go to the back of the room and I sell and sign books. If you are inclined to purchase my book for yourself or for some children or grandchildren, please email me at mzaravets@me.com so we can discuss the transaction. And like the show, Hamilton ends with the line, America, you are an unfinished symphony. The story of the Florida Jewish experience continues. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me this evening.
Thank you so much, Marcia. That was amazing.
That was amazing. That
Do
was
you want
terrific.
to, do you want to take questions? Maybe people will type in questions in the chat box and you could answer them?
Sure, you can, if you can pass them on to me. I don't even have a chat box on my menu. I don't know why.
Okay. Ellen wrote, marvelous, been in Florida since 1954. That was awesome. Does anyone have any questions?
Well, I
Amazing.
lived in Cooper City, which is right near Davie, Florida. And it's good to know that there were Jews starting in 1910 in Davie, Florida.
That's
That
right.
was interesting. A lot of
Louis
things were
Brown.
interesting. It's
We saw
amazing.
the picture of Louis Brown and his story. He was the first Jew in Broward County.
Amazing.
Isn't
The,
it?
the, fo-
I
the
used the
founder
word
of,
amazing so much.
the
You
founder
are
of the
really an
villages,
encyclopedia. Just really terrific.
Thank you.
the founder of the villages was Jewish as well, Mr. Schwartz.
Yes, I have to add that. I didn't have that in time for my book, but I have to add that.
Everyone
to the
here knows that.
So we lived in Cooper City, and Cooper City was named after Morris Cooper, who was a Jew.
Yes, he's in the book.
Oh, he is. Well,
Yes.
I have to buy your book then.
Yes, you will. There's a darling picture of him putting up the street sign.
Well, if you go to Cooper City High School, in the main office, there's a big picture of him because he had bought Israeli bonds. And when they were building this high school, they used the Israeli bonds to build this public high school. So that's
That I
very
didn't know.
interesting.
See, that's how I learn. I learn from my audiences. I meant to show the book. It's a very book. They call it a tabletop book. It weighs over 4 pounds. It's 434 pages and has 716 photos. And one of them is Morris Cooper.
How do you like that? Well, I will do that. So I just email you and then we could arrange it.
Yes.
Okay. Is it, Rabbi, can you give us the email and put it on the chat by any chance?
It's right up on there. You could see it.
Oh, okay, I got it. Thanks. I think my children really enjoy this a lot.
I'm glad. I'm glad to hear.
And they'll pass it to the grandchildren, which is great.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions or any comments?
You
Beryl
certainly
Nerman.
did the walk and did the talk and walked the walk. That's for sure.
Okay, Beryl Nerman says, I was wondering where the early Jews in Florida came from. Where were they German Jews or Eastern European Jews?
Both, and there's a whole section, a big section of my book about where Jews came from. I showed a lot of them. They were from Romania, they were from Russia, they were from Germany, primarily, those 3 places. But they came from South America, they came from other places in North America, they came from literally all over the world. And that's a lot. I deal very seriously with that in my book. I show examples of all different places where Jews came from.
Okay. Anyone else? Thanks so much. All right, Marcia, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And if anyone wants to buy the book, you go to you see the email there. I want to wish everyone a very, very happy Passover coming up. And again, if anybody needs anything for Passover, please visit archabad.org/Passover 2021. And you can get whatever you need. And we will be able to continue the Jewish tradition here in Florida so that the next generation will have more stories to tell, right?
Absolutely.
Especially that we're in a brand new city in Florida, in the villages. So there's so much that the next generation will have to tell about here. So
well, I hope that the villages or your congregation, somebody has an archivist that will start collecting the pictures of where the people came from, what they did in their lives, their careers. And these are the stories that we need to pass on. So it's very important to do it in the villages.
absolutely, that's very true. So you have to come sometime in person
I would love to.
Over, you'll have to come in person.
Yeah.
I lived in Orlando for 30 years, but that was before the villages.
Right. All right. Thank you, everyone. We're going to sign off now. And I wish everyone a wonderful evening and a wonderful week.
Thank you so much. You too. Thank you, Mary Jo.
Happy Passover, everybody. Bye.
Stay tuned for future talks as well.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank